Reading from Exodus, chapter 13, verses 1 to 10, and then from verse 17. The Lord said to Moses, "Consecrate to me every firstborn male. The first offspring of every womb among the Israelites belongs to me, whether human or animal." Then Moses said to the people, "Commemorate this day, the day you came out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery, because the Lord brought you out of it with a mighty hand. Eat nothing containing yeast. Today, in the month of Aviv, you are leaving, when the Lord brings you into the land of the Canaanites, Hittites, Amorites, Hivites, and Jebusites, the land he swore to your ancestors to give you, a land of flowing with milk and honey. You are to observe this ceremony in this month. For 7 days, eat bread made without yeast, and on the seventh day, hold a festival to the Lord. Eat unleavened bread during those 7 days. Nothing with yeast in it is to be seen among you, nor shall any yeast be seen anywhere within your borders. On that day, tell your son, 'I do this because of what the Lord did for me when I came out of Egypt.' This observance will be for you like a sign in your hand and a reminder on your forehead that this law of the Lord is to be on your lips, for the Lord brought you out of Egypt with his mighty hand. You must keep this ordinance at the appointed time, year after year." When Pharaoh let the people go, God did not lead them onto the road through the Philistine country, though that was shorter. For God said, if they face war, they might change their minds and return to Egypt. So God led the people around by the desert road towards the Red Sea. The Israelites went up out of Egypt ready for battle. Moses took the bones of Joseph with him because Joseph had made the Israelites swear an oath. He had said, "God will surely come to your aid, and then you must carry my bones with you from this place." After leaving Succoth, they camped at Etham on the edge of the desert. By day, the Lord went ahead of them in a pillar of cloud to guide them on their way, and by night in a pillar of fire to give them light, so that they could travel by day or night. Neither the pillar of cloud by day nor the pillar of fire by night left its place in front of the people.
After 6 days, Mark 9:2-13. After 6 days, Jesus took Peter, James, and John with him and led them up on a high mountain, where they were all alone. There was transfigured before them. His clothes became dazzling white, whiter than anyone in the world could bleach them. And there appeared before them Elijah and Moses, who were talking with Jesus. Peter said to Jesus, "Rabbi, it is good for us to be here. Let us put up three shelters, one for you, one for Moses, one for Elijah." He did not know what to say. They were so frightened. Then a cloud appeared and covered them, and a voice came from the cloud, "This is my son, whom I love. Listen to him." Suddenly, when they looked around, they no longer saw anyone with them except Jesus. As they were coming down the mountain, Jesus gave them orders not to tell anyone what they had seen until the Son of Man had risen from the dead. They kept the matter to themselves, discussing what rising from the dead meant. And they asked him, why do the teacher of the law say that Elijah must come first? Jesus replied, to be sure, Elijah does come first and restores all things. Why then is it written that the Son of Man must suffer much and be rejected? But I tell you, Elijah has come, and they have done to him everything they wish, just as it is written above him.
Thank you for the reading once again. We continue our series on the Gospel of Mark. And it is so wonderful to learn once again. And today is a very special passage about the transfiguration of Jesus. So, we see there are 3 disciples here, and also 3 prophets. 3 disciples, 3 prophets. And we also see joyful environment. Peter even wants to stay there. He looks like very selfless, is it not? He talked about putting a tent or tents for the 3 prophets, but not for him. Maybe, I don't know where he wants to live. So it looks like very selfless. The third thing is, Jesus told them to keep it secret, not to tell anyone. Why? So there are several things that we can learn from here, I'm very sure. Yeah. Jesus took Peter, James, and John up a high mountain. He was transfigured. His face shone like the sun, and his clothes become dazzling white. Yes, Moses, Elijah appeared with Jesus. Peter offered to put up 3 tents. A bright cloud developed them, and a voice said, "This is my son, whom I love. With him I am well pleased. Listen to him." So at the end of the day, it is Jesus who is sovereign. The disciples fell to the ground, terrified. "Get up," said Jesus. "Don't be afraid." When they looked up, they saw no one except Jesus. Let us see a little bit about the background of this. Yes, Moses and Elijah are 2 key figures from the Old Testament. We know that Moses led God's people, the Israelites, out of slavery in Egypt. He then met with God on Mount Sinai, gave the people God's laws, the 10 Commandments. Moses' face was radiant after such close contact with God. You remember that? So even Moses, it was not like transfiguration, but Moses' face was so bright at that time. No one can even look at, right? So it was already happens in the Old Testament. So the main reason here is we look at about Moses is that he was so important. He was the man that stand on behalf of God and also on behalf of man. Depend on what terms, right? And God gave him the 10 Commandments. Of course, Moses wrote the first 5 books of the Bible. So, he's so important. He's a big prophet. He also mentioned that the great prophet is coming. So, he's so important as well. And looking back to Elijah, Elijah was a prophet, one of God's messengers. He also went to Mount Sinai, where God revealed himself in gentle whisper. And Elijah, you remember that? Elijah is also doing a lot of miracles. And he's even called the greatest prophet in the Old Testament, before John the Baptist. And here the complication for us is that Jesus said Elijah indeed came back, right? At the very last of the chapter that we just read, if you look at there, Jesus replied, to be sure, Elijah does come first and restores all things. Why then is it written that the Son of Man must suffer much and be rejected? But I tell you, Elijah has come, and they have done to him everything they wish, as it is written about him. It's not about the Messiah. It's about Elijah. Then who will be this Elijah?
Baptist.
It's possible, is it not? We don't really know who is. That's why people confuse as well. Sometimes even Jesus himself was called Elijah. Some people believe he's Elijah. Elijah is back. And John the Baptist, a lot of people believe, is the spirit of Elijah. And you remember that, when Jesus became so famous, Pharaoh said, "This must be the man that I kill and raise again." You remember that? He afraid that John the Baptist was raised from the dead. So, in other words, it's great. He's great prophet. Elijah is great prophet. John the Baptist is great prophet as well. So even the king's afraid of them. Here Jesus mentioned that he indeed came. We do not know who. Let us leave for us to think for Simon, right? Because if I tell you this is John the Baptist, it will be like, I'll be like my own people who said this is this. So they are very brave when my people preach. They'll say that this is this. Even in doctrines, when they teach, even belief and unbelief, John Calvinism and Arminianism, they said, this is this, this is this. If you don't believe, that means the devil. They don't share, they don't put rooms for reflection. They will always say, this is this. Maybe sometimes even wiser than God sometimes. So I don't want to tell you anything that I'm not sure myself. However, it is very sure that we know that it was already happened, but we do not know who that Elijah is. Yes, it's not only these two prophets who are great. Who is the greatest prophet? Anyone can answer me. Who is the greatest prophet? Is that Elijah or John the Baptist?
Jesus said John was the greatest prophet.
But John said, there is a greater man than me. Who is that? Jesus himself. So Jesus was with them too. Remember Jesus' three offices. He's king, prophet, and priest. So he's a part of prophecies. He's the one who fulfilled. He's the one who did every work for man as well as for God. So Jesus himself is there. And he's, of course, the lawgiver. Moses is the lawgiver, indeed. Jesus is also the lawgiver. He said, you have heard that if someone kill, he will also be killed, right? But I give you the new law. You see? If you had your brothers, you are murderer. So he's the lawgiver. Again. And he's also the prophet. How? He talks about God. The prophet talks about God. He said, whatever I tell to you or I speak to you, it's not from me, it's from my Father. And he also said, whatever I do, not only speaking, whatever I do is to fulfill for my call, right? In other words, he's the greatest priest. In the Bible, God's presence is often shown by cloud or fire. That's another important point that we need to point out here. We remember that in our Old Testament readings, God led his own people, both fire and clouds. If he lit them daytime on fire, do you think that they can survive? No way, right? Because in wilderness it's too hot at daytime. So rather use clouds so that they can still walk. And nighttime, again, wilderness is too cool for all the travel that they have. So God used fire. So they actually have both heating and cooling. God is so good, is it not? Heating and cooling. So the origin of heating and cooling system is God himself. The same thing here. We see the clouds, special clouds or fire was called Sakina in Hebrews. That means God's presence. God is there. So do you really think that in heavens we don't need sun or air conditioning? Because Jesus will be our air conditioning and our heating, is it not? All weather will be the same, I think. So that will be difference. We don't need cosmetic there. We will not experience any more sunburn, right? That will be a joyful place. And that will be the best for our skins in heaven. So God's presence, Shekinah, is always shown by clouds or fire. Here we see the 3 disciples as well. It's not only 3 prophets. We also see 3 disciples. Always important disciples here. Who are them? Peter, James, and John. Why Peter is important?
Leader of the church.
He's the leader, yes. I actually put some note, but that's in my computer, not transferring here, about Peter. Peter, indeed, when Jesus called on this rock, I'll build my church, right? A lot of interpretation about this. Suppose here, Peter, if I were Jesus, according to the Catholic's interpretation, Peter, on this rock, I'll build my church. That's what the Catholic would interpret. Protestant, or Reforms, or disciples, the Apostolic Creed will do like this. Here is Peter. Peter, do you know me? You see here, on this rock, which is, now, you see me? Said, Peter, do you see me? On this rock, I'll build my church. That is what the Reformers said. So according to the Catholic, God or Jesus built church on Peter, but according to the Apostolic Creed or the early church teachings, Peter, on Jesus, I'll build my church. That's the difference. All right? However, God gave him permission to buy and to unbuy, is it not? To lose on earth. In other words, he's a great preacher. So salvation indeed is the work of Christ, but through the gospel, through the teachings and preaching of the gospel. So if you preach and people believe, that means they will not be in heaven. They'll be in heaven. That's the main thing. So Peter himself is so important here too. He's the first person who actually received authority from Christ himself on behalf of all the disciples, on behalf of us as well. That's why sometimes I like the Catholic way of forming church, the administration. I think that is really biblical, Anglican, biblical, through the pastors. In other words, through the bishops, that they lead the church, because they are the one that God called them. I think we studied all these things before, which I don't need to speak too much. However, it is him that God gave him authority to lead his church. And he indeed became church leaders. Among 12 disciples in Jerusalem, he was the leader. All right? And what about James? James, the brother of Jesus, is it not? Is that correct? He is also the leader. They call him the apostle to the Jews. He's like Peter. James is called the apostle to the Jews, mainly the scattered Jews. So he's very practical. After Peter, James was the leader in Jerusalem for many years. Of course, Peter left. Peter left Jerusalem and go to different places, is it not? He was gone to different places, but James was leading the church on behalf of Peter. And he negotiated the culture between Jewish and Gentile as well. He's a very practical man. And he wants to make sure that Christianity is not Judaism. We are saved by grace alone. But we also need to do work to show who we are. So James is important, and he's also the brother of Jesus. And if I'm not wrong, James did not believe Jesus until his resurrection. So he's a very special man. The third one is John. John, the youngest disciples. But why John is so important? Not only that he wrote the Gospel of John, but also Jesus revealed himself to John to write about the future, immediate future. That's why if we read the book of Revelation, which is written by John, remember, he said, which will take place immediately, not after 2,000 years. He mentioned, he saw John what will take place. Sometimes it's already happened, but he saw him like a prophet, or a prophecy looks like coming, but already happens. However, it's an immediate future that John reveals in the book of Revelation. So the book of Revelation is so important. It's not for the next generation it's immediate future of Jesus. That's important when we interpret. So his prophecy is revealed to John. Here, the word transfiguration means change of form or appearance. In this passage, Jesus' appearance changes, so a glimpse is given of all his full heavenly glory. His face shone like the sun, and his clothes became as white as the light. In Matthew chapter 16, verses 13 to 20, Peter has shown understanding of Jesus' identity, that he is the Christ. or the Messiah. This experience is to help deepen this understanding. It is so special that only Jesus' three closest followers, Peter, James, and John, are chosen to witness it. Jesus wants them to understand that his role of Messiah will involve suffering and death, but this will not be the final outcome of his mission. Jesus has come from heaven, and he will return there when he has completed his task on earth. The same thing, when he finishes his task in heaven, he will come back for us. This story is filled with Old Testament references, which Matthew records would easily pick up. It takes place 6 days after Peter's declaration of faith. And this may be linked to Moses, who spent 6 days. Inspiration before he was called to approach God in a cloud on Mount Sinai. This incident also took place up a mountain, and a cloud symbolizes the presence of God. Moses and Elijah appear and stand beside Jesus. This symbolizes that Jesus is their successor and has fulfilled both. He's now bringing a new covenant from God for all people. So that is, remember, this is, I'm not reading the Bible, this is sermon. We believe that the reason two of them appear with Jesus is that all the fulfillment of the law and prophecy is in Jesus. So that's the main thing that I try to explore about. So when God's voice is heard, he's reassuring the disciples that even though Jesus must suffer, they must listen to him and obey him. Jesus again commands the disciples not to tell others of this experience. The time for this will be later, after his death and resurrection. So here, why Jesus said to his disciples not to tell to anyone? The answer is, it's not the time to reveal yet. Suppose if they say, we see this, maybe people may not believe, although they have all the records. But he saw in practical way his death and resurrection. So after that, when the disciples revealed what they saw and saw their records, then it shows that it really happens as the prophecy. So everything is fulfilled in Christ. To be assured that the Lord Jesus is the true Messiah, although he will suffer, die, and rose again. To make sure that what they are doing is not wrong. Although they thought that they have nothing to do when he was on the cross. Everyone said that we have nothing to do, so let us go back for physics. But what they were doing with Jesus was really true. And so they reveal it practically when the time comes. But until they open the eyes, until the history has fulfilled, it's nonsense to tell them to the people, which they will not believe. Anyway, in this transfiguration, what we can learn is that Christ is anointed one, and he's the Messiah, and everything fulfills in him. So he's greater than Moses, he's greater than Elijah. And of course, the disciples to whom he revealed his secret. And after his resurrection, he said, go and tell now. Before, he said, don't tell anyone. But now, go to all nations. Tell them, teach them about all these things. reveal all the secret and make disciples. Anyone would like to add or comment? Anything? As we usually do. Prophets, prophecies, and all laws. All the laws fulfilling Christ. And we can now reveal that it's not secret anymore. Let us go and reveal more.